Bill C-5, our government's One Canadian Economy legislation, has just passed the House of Commons. It is our contribution to a much broader effort with all the provinces, all the territories, to eliminate the barriers that have held our country back for far too long. Barriers that cost Canadians as much as $200 billion in lost opportunities every year. That's equivalent to around $50,000 for every Canadian. And with the changes to labour mobility, it will help Canadian workers to do their jobs wherever they want to in this great country.
That is, of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney talking about Bill C-5, outlining why he wants it passed, and the money, of course, as he said at the end, that it costs Canadians. So on the surface, you might say, well, yeah, that sounds like a terrific idea, right? Interprovincial trade will be part of what's covered here. The idea of build, right? This is part of this as well. Not everyone, however, is on board. And I can tell you now, in the Senate, this is, and we still don't know what that vote is going to be, there's much discussion about possibly sending this back, not approving it in its current form, and sending it back to the House for a final vote. André Pratte is a communication consultant. He is a former Canadian senator, and he is one of those people who does not think this is necessarily a good idea and that the Senate should act. So, Mr. Pratte, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Let me begin by asking the obvious question, which is, Canadians hear this, think, well, no, this is exactly what we need. It's what the Prime Minister promised. Why do you think this is not a good idea?
Well, I think what is a good idea is to have those national interest projects go ahead faster than they would under current laws and regulations. So I agree with the objective. The problem is this is a complex law with many repercussions. And that requires some time to study in depth so that both the House of Commons and the Senate are sure that the act that comes out of this is well balanced and well thought through. The bill, what it does in its current form is that it gives Cabinet arbitrary power not only to decide which projects are of national interest or not, but which laws and which regulations will apply to such projects or will not apply, including the assessment of environmental possible damage brought about by those projects. So giving such extensive power to Cabinet without studying the possible alternatives and suggesting some amendments, as some have done, I think that's very, it's not a careful way to legislate. And giving the Senate just a couple of days to study this is irresponsible and undemocratic.
But it seems to me, as you outline that, the irony here is this is a bill designed to make things happen faster. You're describing a situation where you'd like to see more time spent, which will actually slow things down. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, first of all, there are no, at the present time, there are no shovel-ready projects that would be affected by the act. So it's not it's not a week or two additional debate in Parliament that would affect those projects. We're talking about projects that will take years to build. And this idea, the government is always in a rush to have its bills adopted. I've seen it in the Senate when I was there. They always say it's an emergency and you have to adopt it really quickly without giving it, thorough examination as it should be. And the government is basically telling senators, as they did MPs, you need to trust us. We'll do this in the right way. We'll respect the environment. We'll respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. But I mean, this is a law. It will become law, and it will be used not only by this government but subsequent governments that would maybe not have the same good intentions. So when you legislate, you have to be careful what's in the law and not only listen to, the good intentions of the government that is currently in power.
As I hear you say that, I think to myself, you're almost making the assumption here that the government, by virtue of wanting to do this as quickly as it does, has some malintent or is prepared to deal with some kind of, whatever comes of this, whatever, the outcome is of a project that begins, and then deal with it later, but that they would want to do something to either damage the environment or damage, rights of those First Nations. Why is that the assumption?
Well, it's not the assumption, but it's that is what the bill allows in its current form. So, I mean, when you legislate, you don't legislate the good intention of the government currently in power. You legislate for the long term, because once it's in an act, It's what's written in the act that matters, not the good intentions expressed by a minister or the prime minister. And again, I repeat, I agree with the idea of accelerating those major projects that are important for Canada's economy. All I'm saying is that when you have a bill that has so much important consequences and gives so much power to cabinet, you have to think this through carefully and look at possible alternatives, amendments. Some have been suggested in the House, some have been adopted in the House, but then the House left for the summer, and basically what they're telling the Senate is, well, whatever you do, we'll ignore it because we're gone for the summer. And that's not the way we legislate. I mean, the Senate plays an important role in legislation. It's happened very often that the Senate has discovered mistakes in bills and that have been corrected. And in fact, the government is telling us, well, eventually, if there are mistakes, eventually we'll change it. But it's not eventually. When you legislate, you must try to have the best legislation in place so that the rights of all Canadians are protected, so that the environment is protected, and the economy, obviously also is protected.
All right, so then let me play this through. So as sober second thought, which is what the Senate is supposed to be doing with any bill they get, but in this particular case, with C-5, let's say the Senate makes the decision today or tomorrow, because we're understanding that's when it will be coming down, to send this bill to the House. Then what happens?
Well, if that happens, and frankly, I would be very surprised that happens. Voting has started right, while we're speaking, and every indications are that the bill will be adopted as is without amendment by the Senate by the end of day today. But suppose it happens. Suppose the Senate would propose some amendments. Well, we'd have to call back the House, and the House votes on these amendments and decides whether they accept it or not. And in the end, the Senate will not log the law because the senators are very well aware that they're not the elected House. Right. But they would at least have highlighted some problems with the act and maybe convinced the government to amend further the law so that we have a well-balanced act that does not give extraordinary, arbitrary power to cabinet.
Can I ask you, with respect to the two things that keep coming up here, the two concerns? You mentioned the environment and obviously First Nations. There have been some questions as well. Are there any other areas that have you concerned?
Well, I mean, one of the other problems with the law as it's written now is that it does not say the same thing that the Prime Minister has been saying. For instance, on proposed pipelines that could go through BC or Quebec or whatever. Well, the Prime Minister during the campaign said if a province decides that they don't want a pipeline, then we'll respect that. Well, that's not what the bill says. The bill says nothing about that. So there's obviously a problem here. I mean, does a province have a veto over projects going through its territory? I'm not saying I agree that they should or that they should not have, but the thing is, it has to be clear whether a province has a veto power over a national interest projects going through its territory. And I mean, that it matters for Quebec, but it matters for BC also. Alberta is currently talking about a major pipeline that would go through BC to reach the ocean. Well, I mean, does BC have a veto over such a project or not? Do Indigenous people have a veto on such projects or not? That's not clear in the legislation. And again, what the government tells us is trust us, we'll do the right thing. That's not enough. When you legislate, it has to be in the text of the act that you adopt.
So what I'm taking from this is, as you lay this out, and for people, and I'm sure there are people who agree with your points as well, what it does end up doing is delaying yet even longer projects that have not yet started, and you're suggesting that delay, it's not really a big delay, it could be a matter of weeks or months, and we shouldn't sort of hold this up just by virtue of that. Is that accurate?
Well, yes, because as I said, again, I mean, there are no such projects for the moment. Those are projects that take years to plan and years to build. So it's not a matter of weeks. Weeks will not matter in the end for completing those projects.
Well, what also doesn't matter, you said, is it's all likely the Senate will simply go ahead, rubber stamp this, and we end up back where we started. So that's you consider that a defeat?
It's not a defeat. I think the Senate is if they go through with this and agree with the government not to amend or stop the bill, or at least delay the adoption of the bill, that means to me that the Senate is not as independent from the government as it purports to be.
Okay. Look, as you said, I know the vote on this is happening as we speak. We may know before the end of the day. I just, I have one last question, which is, as I hear you say this, and for all the talk about Bill C-5, and I think sometimes this gets lost rather in the weeds. Canadians are asked about something like this, and they see that, the mission here is to, establish interprovincial trade and deal with issues that have held this country back economically. You think that most people looking at this don't really kind of dive deep and try to understand the points that you're bringing up?
I think Canadians agree with the purpose of the bill, and so do I. So it's just a matter of making sure that the legislation does exactly what the government says it's doing. And I think it's doing much more than that. It's giving Cabinet too much power. That's my point of view. Right. But I agree with most Canadians that we need to accelerate the adoption or the moving forward of some of those projects.
You're just saying let's do it smartly as opposed to the way it's being done now.
You're saying it much better than I would.
I don't think so. Mr. Pratte, I thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Take good care. André Pratte. So, look, we'll know the result of this bill probably before the end of the afternoon, if not then by tomorrow.